I think when I was viewing this documentary, it was interesting to see all of this footage, this archival footage of a Republican vice president also running to be president soon after he was elected. And he's saying, as a candidate, I am the environmental president. I will be the environmental president because it's almost unimaginable today to see a Republican or even imagine a Republican running as an
Right.
environmental president. So, but if you think about George H.W. Bush, he's this Northeast transplant. He moves to Texas. He makes his fortune in the oil industry. Now he's saying, I'm the environmental president. And he's president at a time when there are a lot of questions about the environment and climate change and things like that. There's a lot of media attention, scrutiny on oil industries. Pedro, what do you make of his leadership when you're sifting through all of this archival footage? And where do you think was his biggest misstep, perhaps?
Well, I think one of the things that really surprised us, I think, was how actually, even though George H.W. Bush was a former oil man, he did have that background, but how actually he I think he was really open to it. I think we did see in a document, so we found in an extraordinary treasure trove at the Bush Presidential Library, and documents and footage that had never been seen or published before. And one of the things that we see was that the willingness and the openness that uh, President Bush had to actually tackling this head on. He very much respected Secretary EPA Administrator Bill Riley. Um, and he does say in documents, let's tackle this. Let's try to do something about it. And I think as the it really was um, there was an industry there was becoming very concerned. The fossil fuel industry was becoming very concerned, and it was a very massive lobbying effort on their behalf, uh, going straight to Jon Sununu, who was had exerted an extraordinary amount of influence, as we actually saw in the documents that we uncovered at the Bush Library, and he really intervened very much in a very active way, appointing under much, literally trying to undermine um, uh, Administrator Riley, to the point where he is being, as Bonnie said, he's being questioned in public television about being the czar, like he's the one setting policy. And he begins to kind of take on, Sununu begins to take on the fossil fuel industry talking points. And we also saw the other thing is to say one of it's just the most mind-blowing things was the documentations from the fossil fuel industry of the strategies. It was a very clear-cut strategy. It was not
Mhm.
sort of like, oh, it all of a sudden appear. It was a very strategic way how the narrative was subverted. They planned it out, and we saw it in multiple and multiple documents from the fossil fuel industry. And by the way, the same industry whose scientists were confirming in the 1980s that this was happening, and they were echoing all the scientists were saying this is going to be a problem. So I think in terms of the Bush presidency, I was shocked of how much of a chance we actually had because he was very open to President Bush was very open to taking action.
And that chance really, obviously, it seemed like a opening window, and that window was slowly closing. And I think that was one of the most surprising parts of the documentary, right? Seeing those internal documents from Exxon. I have notes about them. The Exxon really seemed concerned about the calls for action, the media attention when it came to protecting the environment, people talking about climate change. Bonnie, when you got your hands on those internal documents, I mean, what were you thinking?
I mean, the idea that we had access to an internal conversation inside the Oval Office was just so incredible to us. And I mean, we work in a visual medium, so we had to figure out ways to, both with the archival footage and these memos, bring that to life in a way that felt like a scene, you know? And so we really made the documents a character in the movie. We had them in conversation with each other. You sort of, as a viewer, expect to come back to them. And we were shocked by what we found out about George Bush in those memos, how open he was, how much he was pushing the climate agenda, how he wanted an international conference on climate change. And also, I just was recently talking to Bill Riley on the phone, and he said the most surprising thing to him was how the way in which Sununu spoke to Bush in those documents. That the way that he was speaking to a sitting president with sort of a lack of respect, telling him what to do in a way that felt like something new for the guy who was the EPA director at the time. So I thought I think that's really interesting, and I'm very glad that the documents play such a main character in our movie, because they really advanced the plot. They advanced George Bush's character in a way that we couldn't do any other way.